So, hi, good afternoon. Hello, Fitchburg State. Yeah! I am President Donna Hodge. I am absolutely delighted to see all of your smiling faces here today to get to talk to one of our most distinguished alums, class of 1983, Communications Student of the Year, 1983, and renowned author, illustrator, filmmaker, entrepreneur, all-around solid human, and I think an example of one of the amazing students who had an experience at Fitchburg State and went on to leave a very significant impact on this world. We are so excited to welcome Peter Reynolds back home to Fitchburg State and to have time with all of you today to talk about art, creativity, education. We have a lot of educators in this room today. So, Peter, maybe we could just start by telling us a little bit about how your journey at Fitchburg State started, what those first days as a student were like as you were finding your way.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. And hello, everybody. It's great to be back. This is home for me. I rolled up that hill back in 1978. And I don't know, can anyone do the math? How many years ago was that? 1978? 47. Wow. So 47 years ago, I rolled up that hill. And I was actually just tagging along for a ride. I hopped in the car with my brother, Paul. I have a twin brother. Do we have any twins in the audience? Awesome. All right. Twinergy. So Paul he had heard about Fitchburg State, and our sister Jane, who was in college at the time, was kind of helping us find the right place to be. So I was poking around, and I love to draw and write and animate and make movies, even in junior high school. And so I knew I wanted some kind of media-rich experience. So I was looking around at Cal Arts and Rhode Island School of Design. So I hopped a ride with Paul. I came up the hill, and then I got a tour. And Dr. Lee DeNike gave us a tour, as well as some of the other staff and the students as well. And I fell in love with this place. And sometimes you just know, you're in the right spot. And so I became a student in 1978. I actually did 1 year at Mass College of Art, so another great state school. But the sirens were calling me back to Fitchburg. And Mass Art was cool, but it was so wildly creative that I said, you know what, I need something a little more practical. And I felt like that's what I was going to get at Fitchburg. So I came back and I did another 3 years. So I did the 5-year route. I don't know if anybody's on the 5-year plan, but I did 5 years.
I did the 10-year plan.
You did 10 years?
I completely understand. Yeah.
But I found my home, and I made my home here. And I was a kid in a candy shop. I just loved it. Yeah.
So we had a chance to talk a little bit last night, and you told us a couple of stories that really struck home to me. One in particular, I very briefly taught 4th grade. And you talked a little bit about 4th grade as kind of a turning point. I think for those of us who survived 4th grade, teaching it or in it, we know like 4th grade is a year where there become more rules. Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, before I do that, I just to get to know my audience. How many artists do we have in the room? Do we have any artists? We have artists. And that, by the way, is a trick question, because if you hang out with me, you know that I can actually think that everybody is an artist. They're just practicing artists.
You got about an hour and a half to flip the room.
Right, and dormant artists. And all of you probably started out in kindergarten and you grabbed a crayon. And I'm just guessing you made some marks. And as you mentioned, right, that 4th grade, around 3rd and 4th grade, I noticed that that's kind of the great switching yard. It's like kids decide, I'm creative, I'm not creative. And a lot of kids by 4th, 5th, 6th grade, they start slowing down. And then by 7th grade, they're usually pointing to the class artist, and they've sort of given up.
You do math well. You're good at art. This person can do music.
Right, and you get that label, and then there are people who are like, well, I know I used to like to draw, and of course, we do not get better at the things we give up on, right? So we do get better if you keep trying. So I kind of made a promise to myself that I would make a drawing every day. Early on, I decided that I'm going to make a drawing every day. And of course, I ended up making 2 drawings, 10 drawings, 20 drawings a day. And for me, I just never stopped. So my mission is to help people not put that pencil down. And it might happen in 2nd grade, 3rd grade. I mean, I actually met a little girl, 1st grader, who we had a group of kids together. I just said, draw anything, just warm up. She was drawing, and I went over to see her work, and she threw her body on top of her artwork. She would not look.
I'm not an artist. Don't look at it.
Right. She said, I said, what's the matter? And she said, very slowly, she just looked at me and she said, I just can't draw. And that broke my heart. I'm thinking, wait a sec, how does a 1st grader decide that they can't draw? And then I thought, probably a clumsy adult said just the wrong thing, right, at the right moment. And I hear adults, and they say things like, oh, I can't draw a straight line with a ruler. I can't draw my way out of a paper bag. I'm a terrible artist. I've heard it all. And I think it's unfortunately, it's very powerful, right? Because those kids are hearing they're superheroes. And by the way, you only have to be a few years older than kids, because kids can look at a 17-year-old and they think they're like 40 years old. But when they hear their heroes, their parents or teachers say, I can't draw, it's like, oh, you've just given the vocabulary for them to say they can't do something. And to me, that is the absolute opposite of what learning is about, right? We want for people to say, I may not know how to do it right now, but if I give it a try and keep going, I might actually learn something. And it may not be your cup of tea in the end, but how do you know if you give up?
Well, let's talk about that and your journey at Fitchburg State for just a minute.
Mm-hmm.
What we hope our students experience when they walk, when they go up that hill, when they walk through the doors of our buildings, is that they have a chance to try something new, to think of themselves as an artist, as a writer, as a future mathematician, as someone who can be a change maker in the world.
Yeah.
Tell us about that experience for you. What was it like? 1978, 1979, being a student, walking these same halls?
Well, it was, for some reason, I was just thinking Saturday Night Fever, we're like staying alive, walking very fast through the campus with bell bottoms on. But
those are back again.
They are back. Well, I was going to say it actually. It's
or they're out
it all
again
comes
already.
around.
Maybe.
Yeah, but what was it like? I suppose it's not that much different in a way. I mean, for me, coming back here is kind of wild that almost everything looks the same. The green smokestack is still there, and all the buildings are exactly the same. And I feel like it was here yesterday. It does not feel like 47 years ago. It's remarkable. And even this building probably was very new when I arrived here. But I just remember
3 years old, I think.
Yeah,
We just celebrated 50 years of Hammond Hall.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was very new. You could still smell the new carpets and fresh paint. And but one thing I really loved was that there was this blend of the old and the new. That we look across here and we can see these lovely old brick buildings, and here's something brand new right next to it. Mm-hmm. And I love that balance of old and new. I'm a big fan of preserving. In my hometown, I live in Dedham, Massachusetts, by the way, and you're all invited. I have a bookstore there called the Blue Bunny, and
a coffee, I hear.
We
too.
had a coffee recently. Yeah, so this is a cafe as well, and I actually started a downtown renovation project because I noticed our downtown was not being taken care of, and we have very narrow sidewalks. It wasn't ADA compliant, and I had built this bookstore, but we needed more people to come to the downtown. So I actually created a group called the Dedham Square Circle. And it was a hybrid merchant civic group. And I formed this group. I hired a jazz band. I asked my friend who owned the movie theater if we could do a slideshow. So I put together a slideshow showing how other towns had renovated their downtown and what we could do in our downtown. And I showed some of the problems that we had and challenges. And within a few years, I had helped raise over $6 million to renovate the downtown. So we have wider sidewalks, ADA compliant, period lighting, really celebrating the history of Dedham, which is one of the oldest towns in Massachusetts. So I also bought the building that our bookstore was in. It was slated to be torn down and turned into a parking lot.
And you saved it.
And I saved it.
I think there's something special there about blooming where you're planted, making the space, not adapting to where you are, but making the space.
Right? I mean, it can be one person that can make all that difference. Yeah. And so if things aren't quite right, you can adjust things and turn it into something that you
create a coalition of the willing.
I love that. I love that. That's good.
We say that a lot at Fitchburg State.
I love that.
Incremental change doesn't happen without one person saying, I believe we can do this.
Yeah. And I actually like when people say it can't be done.
Oh.
Because I get inspired.
It's a good motivator.
Yeah. I had an elder in our town say, when I suggested this idea of renovating the downtown, and I was having these civic gatherings with jazz bands, and this guy came up to me and said, run, don't walk away from this. This will never happen. And that was exactly what I wanted to hear, because I needed to hear that.
Get out of my way.
Yeah. I'm like, you haven't met me. So
You gave us a little bit of advice yesterday about something you would tell our students today, your experience in the in-between spaces, not just the moments in the classroom, but making those connections with your faculty, with your fellow students, finding mentors, being challenged in new ways. I see a lot of student faces in this room. Mm-hmm. So share a little bit. What advice do you have? It was true in 1978. I bet it's still true in 2025.
Yeah, well, my biggest message is don't wait, right? Don't wait for the degree. If you love doing something,
do it now.
Just do it. And maybe some of you you're already doing it. Maybe you're getting paid for it. Does anyone have a paying gig that's related to your degree? You've got, I see some hands going up, a few. I recommend people having business cards. I know that everything's digital these days, but it's kind of cool to have an old school business card with your logo of your company. And if you don't have a company, make one. It's called Illusions of Progress, right? It makes people think that you're further along than you really are. And so whatever it is that you're majoring in, let people know that you love it so much that you would do it without the degree. The degree is nice because you get the little stamp of approval to say, yes, I spent my 4 years or 5 years at Fitchburg State University. But you can start right now. And the way I paid my tuition was by doing freelance work. And I actually was ready to toss a coin because I wanted to go into teaching. But then I started making money doing art and design. And I thought, well, they're paying me for that. Maybe I'll just stick with that. So I ended up a communications media student. So, but as it turns out, I'm doing picture books. So I am in classrooms. So I'm sort of teacher-ish. So
let's talk about the dot. So you spent some time at our McKay School today. I heard that you were a rock star with the students.
It was fun. Definitely. I had my Bruce Springsteen moment today. The kids, I was going through the crowds and they were yelling and screaming. I love being back. I had been there many, many years ago. It's been a while. I think when the Dot book came out, I came and spoke there. And I forgot the question.
I think that was, what was your experience at McKay? That's
McKay,
it.
Yeah, it was just awesome. It was amazing. I mean, meeting my readers is always fun. And I spend a lot of time, I should probably spend more time in my studio because I would produce much more work. But I do a lot of community service work, and I love visiting schools. So I was just in Los Angeles and met with families there, which was very moving, very, very moving.
Families that may have lost things during recent fires.
And then I also spent, after that, I went to South Carolina, and I was in the flood area. And the school I was at, they had actually lost one of their faculty members in the floods.
Wow.
And very disadvantaged community. But man, that school was so filled with love. And it was really a very emotional experience to be there. And I hung out at the end of the experience. I did 3 days there. And on that last day, I hung out with the teachers, and it felt like the end of it, like a retreat. And it was very emotional. And I just told them, you guys are doing something right. And I said, you love your students, and you can see it. There's so much love in that school. And as the old saying goes, right, what the world needs now, right, is love. And we're in some very challenging times right now, as we all know. And I think that, that's one of the missions I'm trying to encourage people to do, is to use whatever creativity you have to actually make things better, because we're in a dark place right now, and we need light. And I believe that the arts and teaching and healing, if you're in medical, there's so many ways to bring light to this world. And so, don't give up. Just bring your creativity to those who need it.
Let's talk a little bit about the art in the dot, the story of the dot. You have this amazing way as an author, as an illustrator, as an artist, to make really complex, deep ideas accessible. Can you talk about that process a little bit and how you balance that? You described it yesterday as the balance between drawing and illustrating, and
right.
the need to do both. But let's talk a little bit about the way you make those complex ideas so accessible.
Well, I love to draw, always have. And then I realized there's this thing called illustration. And illustration is actually different than drawing. Drawing is you put pen to paper and you move your hand around and you get surprised. Illustrating is that there is a concept that you're trying to get somebody else to understand. So it's kind of hard work, right? You're trying to communicate an idea, big idea. But I find that with very few lines that I can communicate an idea. And I think I became really fascinated with like how few lines I could use, and how few words, which is why picture books. This, by the way, is a picture book, not a children's book, right? Children are allowed to read them, but they are for all humans, so for all ages. And we busy adults, we don't have time to, some of us have time to read these, 200, 300-page books, and you're glad you did. But there are a lot of people who are kind of busy. You can get some big messages in a very short, 5-minute read.
And what's the message in your mind about in the dot? And has that changed for you? I mean, what you intended originally and the way maybe it's perceived today? You talked a lot about this moment in time.
Yeah. Well, I remember that little girl who said she couldn't draw, and I decided I would write this book for other kids who said that they couldn't draw. And I think initially it probably was. I was thinking that it was more about art and creativity. But as time went on, I realized the real story is about bravery, right? Just getting started. And I as time went on, people would come to me and say, I'm really glad I read this book because I've been, thinking about a career change, or I'm in a relationship and I'm having difficulties, and they read the dot and they realized like, oh, I have to make my move. I have to do something. I have to start somewhere. And I realized that that little dot represented a lot. That it was the beginning of something, right? Taking the plunge, taking that first step. And then also the other thing that came out of writing this is that I was honoring a teacher. So in this story, this teacher sees Vashti struggling, and she says, make a mark and see where it takes you. And Vashti's really frustrated, and she grabs the marker and she jabs the paper and she leaves one little dot behind. And this teacher, being a clever teacher, takes a look at it and hands it back to her and says, please, sign it. So Vashti's kind of perplexed. She's like, well, I can't draw, but I can sign my name. So she signs her name. She stomps out of the room. She comes back the next week, and there hanging above her teacher's desk is the dot, all framed in swirly gold. And she takes a look at it, and you would think she would be happy that her work was being honored, but she looked at it, and she's like, I could do a better dot than that. And the rest of the book, you see her blossom and bloom as an artist. And she actually encourages somebody who's struggling himself. And she says, make me a drawing. And he bravely makes this little drawing at the end. So it really is a celebration of great teachers. And that's why it was special for me to be at McKay today, to be around teachers. And I know that is core to Fitchburg State University's mission, is to inspire great teaching. But also, everybody here is a teacher. That is my philosophy, that every single person here is a teacher. Everything that comes out of your mouth is going to either lift people up, or you can put people down too. So we have the power to lift people up with our words and encourage people. So we were all teachers. So that book does a lot of heavy lifting for a story that just started.
It's a pretty heavy ask, right? A pretty heavy responsibility.
But it started as a movie in my head. That's how I do all my books. So I actually, do we have any film majors here? Film? Yeah. So for me, I actually, and maybe it's the same with you, you get an idea and you can actually see the movie already, right? You already see it. As I go, then there's just that little that little task of actually getting it from here onto film, or in between you have to create a storyboard. So and that for me I would take my little film in my head and I create a storyboard on 3x5 note cards, and I just lay them out, and I put captions. So I'm not writing the story, I'm just captioning the scenes. And it turns out that reminds me of how few words you need to kind of keep the story moving along. Let's
pause for a second. So you mentioned storyboarding, your process. It's changed a little bit over the years. Mm-hmm. Storytelling is changing pretty rapidly right now. You don't have to look at TikTok or Instagram to see a whole new way of telling stories. Mm-hmm. AI is changing this even faster. What creating looks like today is so very different. Slide rule to calculator, in fact.
Right.
So what do you think that impact is going to be on traditional storytelling? And what worries or excitement do you have about the changing technologies and how we do that work?
Yeah. AI, this is a big one, because when the mouse came out, that was kind of big, cool, but it didn't fundamentally change. You still needed a human being to have an idea and put it down on paper. AI does worry me a bit, and I'm already seeing it in schools where I'm seeing educators super excited. I was at a conference and I saw these teachers being shown AI tools, and they're like, oh, kids are going to be, they'll be strengthening their prompting skills. And
it's a heuristic.
Yeah, and it's like you could type in, child holding basketball with wings, and then it's like, oh, it's, and then you could change it to a baseball and you would see the drawing made for. I'm like, I don't think kids need prompting skills. They need to know how to take what's in here and put it on paper. And I will probably, I'm going to stick to my guns to say that human beings are going to be necessary in the future.
Let's hope so.
And the way things are going, technology is kind of trying to make us obsolete. And that's why it's so important. When we talk about creativity, it's not just about making art. It's about having an original thought. And original thinking is an endangered species right now. It is a threatened species. Having your own thought. And, and what does it mean to have an original thought?
And the confidence to run with it when you have one.
Right. And the only way that you get better at being a creative thinker, having great thoughts, is to have a bunch of them and have them come from in here and from your heart. But if it's being done for you all the time, it's like if the drawing, like if kids in the future are illustrating their books just with AI and they never touch a pencil, I think that's not a good thing. Someone could probably argue that it's just going to be another kind of thinking. But when machines are doing the thinking for us, I think that's dangerous. It's a little bit like a country that decides they're going to do the thinking for you. And there are countries on this planet who say, you work, we'll do the thinking, right? And now with robotics, it's like you don't even have to work, but we'll do the thinking for you. So you won't have a job and we'll be doing the thinking. And it's very dangerous.
Let's shift gears talking about danger. Education in the 21st century. The need to have standards, measurable outcomes, an era of testing every single thing. How do we as educators, future creative thinkers, navigate this world full of all of these rules, full of the things that will keep our doors open? It's testing, it's guardrails, it's this compliance component. Mm-hmm. How do we balance that and still keep an eye on the thing that matters, the creative spark, and our students, ourselves?
We could talk about for a long time about this, because this is a hot topic for me. I'm not a fan of standardized testing, high stakes testing. I think testing. I'm actually a fan of assessment. And how many do we have teachers, future teachers? Yeah. I actually think assessment is really good, right? Assessment is any of this interesting to you? And if it's not, then let's figure out what is. To me, that's an interesting question. Like, what is interesting to you? In fact, that probably it's the second most important question that we can ask our kids. What is interesting to you? The most important question is, who are you? I'm a big fan of that. And there are very few instances in public education where we actually say, who are you? Tell us who you are. If you think about it, I don't know if your teachers ask who you were. They get to know you, but there's a lot of busy work, I think. There's a lot of memorization and getting yourself ready for a test it's a snapshot of who you are. But I guarantee you that those snapshots are way off about who you are and what your potential is. It's kind of a guess. And as long as it's used as kind of additional information, but there's so much weight is put on testing. And I think it also, it affects curriculum, it affects funding, right? So we spend a lot of money in this country on testing. We also spend a lot of money on getting kids ready for the test. And some kids do very well with testing. Some people they love it. They love it. My twin brother loves tests. He was great at tests. Not me, not so much. I hated tests. Back in the day, we would fill out these, you'd put in a little bubble. They were bubbles, and you'd fill in the bubbles. And I would just make designs. I wouldn't actually read the questions. I would just sit there and I would make designs. And I came out with fairly good grades, just guessing. So, I mean, that's not a great assessment.
Doesn't say much for the test, right?
I made an animated film called The Testing Camera. So if you look on YouTube, check out The Testing Camera. And it's about a little girl. She comes into art class. She's super excited. And on the board it says, art class canceled, testing day. And so she goes out into the hall and she's in line and all the kids are waiting. And some of them are like kind of excited and some kids are kind of blah. And then some kids are like, she's like seasick. She's like turning green. And they go into this room one by one, and there's a ginormous camera with a huge lens, and it snaps these pictures. It takes 3 pictures of the kid. And then they come out, and they're all dazed. And she goes, a couple of weeks later, you see her at home, and she's gotten the results back from the testing day. And she takes a look at them, and all the pictures are very distorted of her face. And she says to her dad, "Dad, is this me?" And then he looks at these things. And then he takes his wallet. He pulls out his license and he gives it to her. And there's a photograph of him. And he's got like one eye closed and he looks kind of awkward. And she's like, "Who is that?" And he said, "Exactly." And he said, "Daisy, all I know is that I love your heart. And I love the way you make people feel. And I love that you're always ready for an adventure. And I love the way you dance. And he basically goes through all of these things that are not able to be tested by a test. And that he actually knows his daughter and loves his daughter. And if you have kids, and if you do have kids eventually, I have 2 kids and now 2 grandchildren. You love them so much, no matter how they struggle. You love them. And you want the best for them. And you just wish that the rest of the world could see what you see. And that's my wish, is that all educators can see that beautiful kid that's there. And maybe they're struggling, and maybe they're acting out. Maybe they're bored. And you know what? It's okay for them to be bored. Let them be bored, but then have that conversation. What isn't boring? Right? What sparks you? And it's going to be different for everybody.
Every single
right? And you can't say all 30 of us are going to be sparked about this. It's just, for me, it's like school is like, it's serving up appetizers. And it's like, try this, try some curry, and you try it. And then you're like, this not so much, this is pretty cool, right? And then we should give our kids permission to say, I'm going with that, right? Mm-hmm. And then really dive in deeply, because I also feel like maybe school, we just get like that we kind of stay on appetizer level. We don't go in for the full course. Sure. But I think that's why I wrote a book called The North Star, and it's about following your North Star. And I think everybody here has a North Star. And maybe you have a constellation. Maybe you have like 5 stars, right? Like for me, I loved art. I loved animation. But I also was a camp counselor. I had a job at a special needs camp and a Y camp.
You were an Eagle Scout?
An Eagle Scout, right? Eagle Scout. And all those stars combined, for me, it wasn't just art. It was working with kids, helping kids kind of navigate their true potential. So I encourage people to make your star map. Just grab a piece of paper and just start putting little stars. If it's a very important thing for you, make it a big star. If it's something like it's just a kind of fun fact about yourself, like I was born in Canada, so I have a Canadian star. Does it impact me daily? Probably not, but it does. It is part of my story. And I think being an immigrant, which it's funny when I go into schools and I talk to kids, I'm like, I'm an immigrant. And they're like, you don't look like an immigrant. I'm like, there are all sorts of immigrants. I came to this country. My father was from Argentina. Mom was from England. They survived World War II. They went to Canada, couldn't make it a go of it there. So they came to Somerville, Mass. And I grew up in a big family. And we kind of, we made it work. And that was also sort of foundational for me, which kind of is why I'm here at Fitchburg, because we had a big family. We had only been in this country for a decade, and my dad and mom did pretty well considering, but we were not awash with cash. So my choices were economic, and I wanted a good education, but I wanted one that I could actually afford. And so that is why I'm like thrilled that I found Fitchburg State, because there was so much here. And again, you get what you put into it. And you could go to Harvard and not put your best effort into it, and you will walk away with nothing. You could come here to Fitchburg. If you lean into it, there's so much here, there's so much potential, and so many great educators here, professors who really care about you. And you just have to ask them, for help, and they will give it to you. I was very blessed. My professor, I think, is somewhere in the audience. Yeah, there she is. Helen Obermeyer Simmons, could you stand up? My teacher, Helen Obermeyer Simmons, who I just want to do a shout out. You joined, when did you start teaching? 1981, yeah. So
she got here just in time.
Just in the nick of time. And Helen was an amazing communications media teacher. You taught all sorts of things, right? Graphic design. And I like to tell the story that I had so little money that I actually slept in my car. I don't recommend this, especially in the winter months. But it was so cold, and I would just stay as long as they would let me stay in the building. So I would do my work, which actually turned out pretty well because I was doing my projects all the time. So I was working, and Helen noticed that I was cold and hungry. She circled back to campus, and she walked through that door, Communications Media Lab, and she had a bag of Burger King. And she brought me a Whopper and fries. And I always say that you saved my life with that. But I just thought it was so wonderful that a teacher would care. Yeah. Thank you, Helen. Yeah. And that really is part of the magic here, is that professors do care.
The pressures on students today are just as serious as they were for you in 1978. We talk a lot about that at Fitchburg State today. We worry about our students and their academic progress when they're worried about so many other things happening in the world, when they might be worried about where they live and what they eat. The added complication is then, when do you find the space for the creative pursuits? When sometimes the world can feel so heavy, when sometimes your needs are so great. How did you balance that? People like Helen, we heard. Something internal, though, drove you. Well, what was that?
Well, I think it is survival, right? I mean, you know you're going to have to fend for yourself. And, that's why I really was working so hard at getting practical tools. So when that day came, I got I was, had my graduation cap, and you take it off, and it's like, okay, now it's the real world. I needed to feel like I was ready. And, not that it's going to be easy, but I want to make sure that people take time for themselves, because I always tell kids, if you look, and grown-up kids too, look through my books, you'll always find a kind person. And that is sort of my challenge to people. Be as kind as you can be, but the number one person you should be kind to is yourself. Make sure that you are taking good care of yourself, which means eating good food. It's something that I'd like to do a book about nutrition, because I think that that's one of the things that, this body that's carrying this amazing brain of yours needs to be healthy. So eating good food is important. Getting enough sleep is important.
Being nourished in other ways, right?
Exactly. Nourished in other ways. And take time out to have fun, have joy. And it doesn't have to make money. That's the other thing too. If the thing that brings you joy doesn't make money, just keep doing it. And if you don't think it's ready for prime time, still do it. If it brings you joy, if you sit at a piano and you plunk away and you're happy, your stress will be reduced. I do believe that the arts are healing. So music, art, and whether you're making it or appreciating it, that's the other thing too. You can appreciate art. You may not feel that you're ready again for your gallery show, but get to museums, appreciate other people's art, listen to music, listen to different kinds of music. I think that's a good way to stretch your brain. And creativity for me is generosity of spirit, which means the door is open to learn it all. I'm not going to get stuck in my lane.
You also told me that you were unrealistically optimistic. And I like this about you a lot, Peter.
I am optimistic. And to the point of being annoying, that's how optimistic I am. And we are in challenging times right now. And, people they're feeling kind of ground down. But I've been through a couple of these, crazy times in history, with recessions, and certainly COVID. And it's like, you know what? You have a choice. You can kind of dwell in it, or you can lift yourself up and say, I am gonna fly over this thing. And I think that we need optimistic people and realize that better things are ahead. I am certain that they are going to be better. And we're going to do it together. And that's why, we need, especially communications media friends, we need to tell positive stories. All of us have to tell positive stories. because the world needs those positive messages. Hate is much louder than love. Kindness is very gentle, it's very quiet. So we kind of have to amp it up. We have to amp up love and kindness. And we can do that through music, through the arts, through film, through great teaching. There are a lot of ways to do it. So we have to rally. And
You do indeed.
yeah.
So I'll ask a last question. We'll, I think, have some time for some Q&A from the audience.
Sure.
But you didn't graduate from Fitchburg State and walk out in the world and become the Peter Reynolds you are today. What advice do you give? I see a lot of faces in this room who are going to be walking across the stage in May this year or May next year.
Yeah.
And they're looking for their next self and the next big version of their life they're going to build.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a combination of things. I mean, when you graduate and you're like, okay, milestone. Now real life is here. I actually kind of started, as I mentioned before, I was doing freelance ahead of time. So I was kind of getting ready. And then I did my internship, which was the other wonderful thing about Fitchburg is that that last semester, I ended up working. And I was at an ad agency, and I was pretty good at it. I did my graphic design, and I was, but because of my connections, my freelance work, I had met a teacher who was teaching at Shady Hill School in Cambridge, and he started a software company, and he was looking for an artist to do a pitch to this software company to get some funding, and I met him, and I ended up getting a job with this guy doing freelance, but then I ended up working for him. So some of those seeds that you plant early on are going to help you after you graduate. So also knowing people, I mean, creating your network is so important. It doesn't have to be a huge network, just that you have a couple of well-placed people in your network who can help you.
Find your Helen.
Yeah, find your Helen, right? Yeah. And I would say that just make the most of whatever you've got, whatever job you've got, even if it's not quite what you want, just excel at it, really push and go above and beyond. If it's 9 to 5, the job, stay to 5:30. It's amazing how management picks up on those. It's like, wow, that guy's still here. It's like, hey, it's time to go home. Come on, Pete, go home. That's what I did when I got my first job. And I noticed that my boss, he would get there before me. And I thought to myself, okay, because I would get in at 9. And then I'm like, what if I got it here at 8:55? He was there. 8:45, he was there. I got there at 8:30, he was there. 8:15, I beat him. And I knew he liked coffee in the morning. That was the first thing he'd put the coffee on. So I thought, I'm going to put the coffee on. So I was
15
there.
coffee.
I put the coffee on. He comes in and he sees me there. And I'm like, oh, the coffee's ready. And I'm like, he's like so excited. I'm like, score, I'm good. And about a year into working there, we hit a recession. We had 35 people fired in one day.
Wow.
They kept 4 people. And I was one of the people because I was the lowest paid employee.
You made some great coffee.
Yeah. But I was a utility player. I didn't have one strength. I had animation. I had art. I learned computer animation. I was an editor. I was a game tester.
A writer.
And a writer. And I also would go into classrooms testing out our software, educational software. So I was also, I knew all of our stuff better than anybody else. So I was also, they would send me on the road to do conferences and talk to teachers. So I kind of could do it all, that's the other thing, be a Renaissance person. Have, learn new things that are beyond your lane.
Learn new things.
Yeah.
Final thought. On the days that you're feeling a little down, what is the thing that gives you hope? What's the thing that keeps you going? For me, I
I think it's all children. Children inspire me. I go into schools and I love them to pieces. And I'm like, I want the best for you. And I want you to feel welcome in this country. I spend a lot of time going across the country and I see a lot of faces that I think, circumstances, I might not see that kid when I come back. And I just think if I could give kids hope, and if we can make this country a kinder place, generous of spirit, that inspires me. That keeps me going. And then also my children. I've got 2 great children and my grandchildren. I keep saying, like when I was doing picture books, and then my daughter finally, she hit 20. I'm like, well, where's my inspiration? And then I opened up a children's bookstore, which gave me my second wave. Then I had a son, Henry Rocket Reynolds. So he gave me that next burst. Now I have grandchildren. So kids keep you, keep you inspired. Hang out with kids. Kids are good for your soul. And if you can reactivate the kid inside of you, that's actually one of my big messages. Don't grow up. It's not worth it. Growing up as there are 2 kinds of big people. There are adults and grown-up children. I think grown-up children live longer. They're much more pleasant to be around, and they're much better for kids to be around. So remember what it was that you did as a kid, and whatever it is, if it's your favorite stuffy or you love playing Legos, incorporate that back into your life and stay a kid as long as possible.
Pick up a pen.
And
pick up a marker.
Pick up a marker. By the way, I created a frame over here. So I started this, but I would love everybody sitting here to come up and make a dot and sign it. And we're going to create a collaborative masterpiece. And of course, that dot just represents, it's the beginning. And it's the beginning. You guys have met me. I'm not talking as a drive-by. I'm here. I'm part of the community. I love that this place is still here, and you've made me feel so welcome. And so many people today that I've met, students and faculty and the kids at McKay, they made me feel so welcome. And I'm home. I'm home. Consider me a friend on the journey. If you need anything, Peter at peterhreynolds.com. Very easy to find me. And if you want to hang out with me, I always tell kids, all you have to do is you find a book with my name on it, start reading, and I will be there with you.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I think we have time for a couple of questions from our audience. And I think we have a microphone here. So I see a hand up.
Hi, Peter. So I'm in the frame of mind of like how I built this. And I'm thinking about the relationship between the arts and operationalizing it. And I'm wondering how you think about the relationship between the arts, creativity, and entrepreneurship. And now I'm thinking about Fablevision too.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot. It's interesting, right? I am an artist, and we get labeled, right? Oh, you're the math kid in the family, and I was the artist in the family, and I kind of lived into that. Like, yes, I'm an artist. I was drawing away. It wasn't until much later, I was probably nearing 30 years old, and I realized both our parents were in finance. They were bookkeepers, and my dad was a treasurer. My mom was a bookkeeper, and my older brother is a CPA. My sister Jane went to Harvard Business School. And I'm like, wow, there's a lot of financial DNA in our blood. And then I thought back, I'm like, when we were in third grade, Paul and I started our own newspaper. And then we would ask our dad to make photocopies, and he would say, guys, this paper costs money. I can't be using the office's supplies if you keep, increasing
circulation.
So he said, you have to give me some money. And that was when the light went on, like, oh, we should charge for these things. So we started charging for our
Quality
comic
product,
books. Yeah.
right? 10 cents per is fair.
And then we opened up a bank account, and we had business cards and stationery, and and that was kind of that idea that art needs funding, right? And you need to actually you have to make some money, and so using art to make money. But what we added was mission. And when I started my own company. So I was working with this teacher who started a software company. We grew from 12 people to 65 people. It was sold for $28 million. Wow. Then I started my own company. And day one, said, I came up with the name of the company, which is kind of fun to name your own company. So Fable, a teaching story, vision, to be able to see. But I love that word vision, is to be able to see things that don't yet exist, which is superhuman power. And so Fable Vision. And I came up with a tagline, stories that matter, stories that move. And I told everybody who worked for me, and still do, that our job is to move this world to a better place. So you can have your skill, your talent, your art. You can make money, but make sure that third leg of the stool is mission. Be doing it for a reason. And this world actually needs passionate people who want to change the world, make it a better place. If you can put all three legs to that stool, that's kind of magic. So I feel very blessed to have Fable Vision. We're celebrating 28 years. One of our offices is on Newbury Street. If you ever want a tour, we do very good parties too. We have open houses, and we invite people in to see all the writers, the artists, the animators, the voice folks, which, by the way, we have our newest studio within Fable Vision is called Audioyo, and it's all podcast, is audio storytelling. Check that out. Check out fablevision.com. There are lots of ways to stay connected, but that's a good question.
Your philosophies and your beliefs actually drive a lot of what you do out of Fable Vision too, right? The no sugar concept.
Mm-hmm, right.
Here are the things we believe in. We don't waver from that. No violence for kids. If
right.
we say we believe this, we're going to live it. But
Yeah.
that changes what you accept.
Which
what
is
you
very
work-
tempting, because, someone's about to give you some money. Like in the early days, we had a project, pretty big project from a company that made fruit roll-ups. You remember, those fruit? And essentially it's just sugar, if you look at the ingredients. And they wanted animated, little fruit roll-ups for some. And we passed. And we actually have phone numbers of other animation studios in Boston. And we recommend that they go out elsewhere, because we try to do things that are healthy for humans. And also, yes, we're really strong on the nonviolence, especially because we do a lot of gaming. We do online gaming, and there's just so many requests for things blowing up. And we're like, there are more creative solutions.
Everything doesn't
Yeah.
have to blow up.
Right?
Other questions? Got a couple of hands up.
Yeah.
Get
Yeah,
the microphone.
Going back to your fiction books, what was like the origin? What was the start of it? Like, what sparked you to thanks. To really like boost like the books, and how did it
Well, it's interesting because as I mentioned, I have two kids. Sarah, when she was little, I would read to her, and we would kind of run out of books. So I could either read the same book that we've read over and over again. I was bored. And then I realized what she really wanted was a story, because I'm like, can I just tell you a story? So I just started telling stories. And I realized, hey, I'm actually pretty good at this. I can make a 4-year-old entertain until she goes to sleep, or before, right? I would go to sleep probably first. But I was in a restaurant in Chestnut Hill. It's called Paparazzi. And I'm a brilliant father. I took my daughter on a Friday night to meet a friend of mine who flew in from LA. And I had Sarah. I'm like, Sarah, do you want to go with Daddy to a restaurant? watch him talk to his best friend from LA. And so we're in line. It took 40 minutes to get a seat. The minute we sat down, what did she say? I want to go home.
I was betting on I'm bored.
I'm bored, yeah. And she wanted it home. She wanted to be home. And I'm like, and they had just poured a glass of wine, and I'm there with a friend, and I'm about to have a conversation. And I'm like, and she's like, Dad, I really want to go home. I'm like, Sarah, if you let Daddy finish his meal, I will tell you a story. I'll write you a story. I picked up a napkin, and I just, the first thing that came to my head, I drew a shoe. It was a high-heeled shoe. And I wrote The Blue Shoe by Peter H. Reynolds. And I gave it to her. And she was kind of sitting there with this. And then she tapped me on the shoulder. What happens next? I had a conversation with my friend Gary Steger, who Dawn knows. And we, by the end of the meal, we made it through. And I actually had to ask the waiter for more napkins. And so he came over a second. I take Sarah home. She falls asleep in the car. I bring her in, unzip her jacket, throw her into bed. And then I reach into her pockets, and all the napkins are there. And I laid them out, and I read the story. I'm like, wow, that actually makes sense, and it's quite moving. And I was so not writing that story. I was having a conversation. But my brain it zigzagged. But because I love my daughter and I wanted her to be entertained, the powers within me said, we will allow you to create this story. And so I created this story, and I ended up turning it into an animated film. So if you search The Blue Shoe on Peter Reynolds, it's in Fablevision, you'll find it. And we actually entered that film into an animation festival, the World Animation Festival, and came in second place, which was our, I think, second year as Fablevision. But that gave me, her birthday was coming up, so I thought a cool thing for Sarah would be to take a blank book, and I took the storyboard and I just wrote it. So I filled it out, and I watercolored it, and I wrapped it up. I gave it to her, and that was when she opened that up, and she was, oh wow, it's a real book, and that kind of gave me the confidence to say, do you know what? I think I know how to do this, and so my second book, first published book was The North Star. And I just believed in that story. I just wanted that story to be out there. And it's about interest-based education. If you check it out, it was, and that was self-published. And that was self-published back in the old days. Where
Share a little bit about that, about the risk you had to take to bring that.
Yeah, I mean, today
it's
self-publishing. You can upload a file, and if somebody likes it, they can order a copy. Amazon or whoever will shoot you a copy the next day. Pretty cool, very easy. Back in the day, you had to do all your art and typography, whatever, get it camera ready, and they would shoot negatives, and they would get it ready for printing. And the printing company was in China, and we had to send the plates off, and then minimum order was, I think it was 2,000 copies, and they were about $5 a piece at the time, and you had to pay for all the plates being done. So it was, in the end, it was probably close to $20,000. And fortunately, I had somebody who believed in me, Bill Churchill, who was my twin brother's boss, who just loved what I was doing, and he said, "I'll bankroll it. I think this'll." So, and so, one day a truck pulled up with many pallets of. I never knew how many boxes 2,000 books were, and when you look at these pallets, they were in the lobby of our office, and we're thinking, okay, now what? How do we sell them? But you throw your hat over the wall, as they say in Ireland, and take your best hat, you throw it over the wall, you just figure out how to do it. And I thought of doing an event at the Boston Children's Museum because I thought that would be a cool spot. Invited teachers, and we actually showed The Blue Shoe, and we probably sold 700 copies that night. And then within a few weeks, we had them all sold, and that gave me the confidence to keep going. And then Candlewick Press in Somerville, they found that book, and they said, we have a manuscript on our desk we think you'd be perfect for. It's called Judy Moody Was in a Mood, Not a Good Mood, a Bad Mood. And so they said, we would love you to illustrate it if you're interested. And I thought it was going to be one book. It turns out there were about 35 books in that series. This is my last year. I'm done. Although there's a graphic novel coming out, and I said, no, thanks. We'll let someone else do that. But you just start and you just get it out there. Believe in your story and get it out there however you can, and just figure out who your audience is and just get the buzz going. We have someone way in the back. Oh, we have.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm a kindergarten teacher at Applewild School, and my student wanted me to ask you this question. She said, how long does it take for you to make your books?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I zigzag. I am not very good at like sitting down and doing like schoolwork. A little bit here, a little bit there, But no, it's about 2 months, I'd say, from start to finish, if you compress it all together. So I'm able to do, 4 to 6 books a year.
Or one really good dinner and 2 glasses of wine.
Oh, that helps.
And a motivated child, right?
That's right, yeah.
Get the question in the back, and then we'll come up front.
And I could probably go faster if I didn't have to deal with traditional publishing. That's another story. Hi.
So we have some important things in common. One is Professor Helen Obermeyer Simmons, who was also my mentor when I first started teaching graphic design here. And one of the things that I learned from her, and that I see that you've learned, and I always go by a quote, there are 2 types of educations. One is to learn how to make a living, and the other is to learn how to live. And when you talked about the star being a metaphor for, reaching your potential and the dot, and how a lot of this comes with play, it's something that I try, maybe you could speak a little bit more about. I just feel it's so important that nowadays, when there's so much pressure to make a living, to compete in the workplace, internship, employment, all of that it's easy to forget about the child inside of us that just wants to create. And thank you for validating that. And if you could speak a little bit more about that.
Sure. The child within. It's a very cool theme. If you check out, I actually made an animated film called He Was Me. And there's a character, there's this guy in a business suit, he's at a bus station and it's raining. And he is, it's raining. And suddenly his chest opens up. There's a door in his chest and there's a little kid inside. And the little kid is like, whew, it gets stuffy in there. I wish he'd let me out more often. And you hear this little soliloquy of the literal child within him. And check out that. It's designed to remind grown-ups to make sure that that kid inside you is being taken care of. So.
Love it. We have a question right here.
Hi, Peter. So as someone who's currently writing a story myself, I find myself overthinking what I'm writing, and I feel like the scope of what I'm writing is just so big that I start and stop, and I can't have a really consistent pace at what I'm trying to write, and it feels like I can't get anywhere. So do you have any advice for any writers here about that?
Yeah. Well, I'm just curious, what's your audience? Who's your audience?
I'm thinking a bit like sci-fi, fantasy, like a grand kind of story kind of thing.
Cool. Well, I have a couple of strategies. One that's working for me personally is I record the story. Even if it's not done yet, just record what you've got. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. It can just be a couple of pages. If it's an epic novel that sounds like you're doing, just do a chapter, not even like half a chapter, and record it. Throw some music on too in the background. It always helps. But then take a break and then listen to it. And it sounds very new and fresh for me anyway. I hear it in a new way because in your head, right, you're always kind of noodling, and I should maybe use a different word. Just settle down and just like say, this is it for now. Record it, listen, and I think And then also let other people hear it that you trust. The most important thing is just to get it out, and then run the logic test. I always say, run the logic test. When you watch a movie and you're like, that's ridiculous, that would never happen. He forgot that he related to so and so. There's the logic test. As long as, especially in sci-fi, that is very helpful. But do you have a name for the project?
So I actually started to write it back when I was 19, and I'm 25 now. It's called Tale of the Four Stars.
Wow. I like it. Tale of the Four Stars. I love it. The other thing for me is there's a technique that we use at Fablevision called IOP, Illusions of Progress. Make it feel like you're much further along than you really are. And for me, designing the cover actually inspires me. So I will design the cover. The first thing I ever do is do the cover. And I put the name and I put the publisher and make it look like it's done. And for some reason that unlocks in my head. I'm like, oh yeah, it's done. And then when I start writing it, it's like it already existed in a weird way. So like for you, like doing a movie post, design the movie poster for it and hang it on your wall. Will it into existence. Believe that it already exists. Because it does. It's in there. In there too.
I love that. I think we have another question right here.
And actually, this comes from my daughter, who is now a second grade teacher. Back in 2004, we bought the book, The Dot, for her.
Oh, wow.
And when we were reading it for her, she was precocious, and she wants to know the origin of her name because she could not pronounce it. And she just said, I'm just going to call her Vicky.
That's great. I love it.
That book now resides in her second grade classroom.
Wow, that's so beautiful.
Yes, it is. And I meant to ask her to bring it home
Yeah.
and to get it autographed. But she wants to know, why such a difficult name?
Yeah. So the character's name is Vashti. And when I had the story in the movie in my head, I didn't have a name for the character, but I started sketching it out, and I knew I was onto something. And I was drawing this little girl sitting in a chair, and she was feeling frustrated. Her page is empty. And so I'm in a cafe, I'm having a coffee, and this little girl comes into the coffee shop. And she had this mop of brown hair, beautiful brown skin, big brown eyes. And she looked like actually one of my characters that stepped out of a book. She was just tiny. She was like tiny and like a waif. And she had flowers, and she was selling flowers. And she asked me if I would buy a flower to support her school. I said, absolutely. Gave her the $1, got my green carnation, and I'm drawing, and she wouldn't leave me. And she just stood there over me, hovering. And I said, I'm look up at her, and she's like, who's that drawing for? So I knew she was gunning for the for the drawing. So I said, it's for you. And she said, really? I said, yes. I said, how do you spell your name? And she said, Vashti. I said, Vashti. I said, that's a great, I've never met a Vashti before. And I thought, wow, that's a great, for a book about creativity, it's much better than something, at least for me, that would be typical, a typical name, right? Right? A Vicky is, or Mary or Jane. I mean, don't tell my sister Jane, but that's, but I just thought it's such a unique name to me that it seemed perfect. Vashti sat glued to her chair, her paper was empty. So anyway, I gave her this drawing, and she was as pleased as punch. And she, I asked her where she was from, and she said Fitchburg. Yeah,
Oh.
Fitchburg. And so she got her mom was outside in a van. They took off, and that was it. That was the last time I saw her. And I came to McKay a couple of years later when the book was published, and I was telling the story about this little girl named Vashti, and the book is named after Vashti. And so afterwards, teachers gathered around and said, that's our Vashti. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is Vashti. Unfortunately, Vashti had moved on and went on a journey for 22 years. And just last year, I bumped into a little kid selling chocolate. And I said to I'm sitting at a bar, on a don't tell this to kids. I was sitting at a bar and I told the bartender's like, I should throw that kid out. I'm like, don't throw him out. It's like, it reminds me of this little girl I met named Vashti selling flowers. And he let the kid comes around, sells us some chocolate. And I said, who are you with? Because he's like 8 years old. Oh, my grandma, she's outside. I look outside, can't see the car, but I'm like, it kind of reminded me of a story. And I said, where are you from? Fitchburg. Do you have a relative in your family named Vashti? Yeah, my aunt. I said, how old is she? He's like, I don't know, like 30 something, 32. And I did the math. I'm like, that checks out. And anyway, he told me her name, and she lives in a state in the Midwest, and her town is called Happy Valley. And I'm like, it's kind of magical. So I called her up, and I reconnected. So I found Vashti. But anyway, McKay School is where Vashti went to school, so there should be a little plaque for Vashti. So anyway, that's
You talk a lot about people being able to see themselves in your stories, and one of the reasons you keep it simple, and you use a name that might be unfamiliar to many of us, like Vashti, is so important.
Yeah. But I want everyone to be able to see themselves in my book, so I try to make my cast diverse. And I love picking different kinds of names. And I always ask kids in schools, I'm like, who can I use your name in my next story? And of course, all the kids are like, they're so excited that to have a name. So if you're working on projects, think about, the names of your characters. And maybe you can push it a little bit, make them more interesting.
Round of applause for our guest today, Peter Reynolds.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Peter, so much. We are so proud to have you back.
It's great to be home.
I think you all have an assignment. It's to draw, though, right? Not to illustrate, to leave your mark. We have a beautiful frame
if you
here.
feel
Before
brave.
you walk out of here today, be confident, be brave.
Create bravely.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Way to go.
Awesome.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you. All right.